Let's create some digital art using Rebelle 4, just one of many programs that you could use creating digital art. I really enjoy this particular program. It does an excellent job of reproducing actual watercolors. These demos will include freehand and photography, and then even a little bit of freehand on photography. I save all these files as a Rebelle file, which is the same as a PSD file, and this will allow me to go back and pick up right where I left off anytime I want. Okay, just to start off, this is my twin monitor set up along with the Wacom, ready to draw, and here is the close-up of the Wacom. It has my cheat sheets on it that I use to remember the buttons, and it's all set up ready to start. Next, we'll go over the effects. What I want to do first is create a masking layer and show you how that will have an effect on all of the effects. The masking layer is right here, ready to go. What I will do is go up here, turn down the water completely, turn up the opacity to 100, grab a black, and then I could just start painting my mask anywhere it should be. Now for this, I will just make basic paint strokes here and there, go down and grab a different brush and show you what effect that would have, and even grab a spatter brush. Say for example I wanted real fine texture on snow or sand, and then I wanted to just use this black here like that. Go back up and grab this brush again. We're going to do this, and what I want to do is this and this, and we'll see what happens with this. Now when I'm done with the black, now all I have to do is click the M and it'll make this the masking layer, and then every other layer will be influenced by that masking layer, meaning that no matter what layer I paint on, that mask will have an effect on what I'm doing. Then what I also want to do is then go up here and just adjust the opacity. I don't need it a pure black. I could turn it the whole way down to 10 or 12, and it will still provide 100% masking ability depending on your stroke of what you're doing. But what it'll do is it'll be a little bit less conspicuous, that I could then go ahead and paint but still know where my masking areas are. So what I'll do is I'll actually zoom in and show you the dry on dry first, and just start. I'll grab a color, just a cobalt violet, and since this is the dry, I'll cut down the opacity and go to my dry layer, since this is my dry layer. And once I start painting, nothing really much special is going to happen other than just I'll get some optical mixes, but because it's dry paint over actually dry paper, then not too much is going to happen. It's just typical painting as such, that whatever I put down is pretty much staying exactly where I put it. But now the biggest thing to remember here though is anything I paint, that is considered a wet area now. So if I go and click on this, everything will turn light blue to show me that that's all my wet area on this layer. And that's kind of important. In fact, you can actually see it bleeding in underneath the mask a little bit area if I kind of lifted it off and it wasn't a pure black edge like these over here, or same thing here where the stroke end. I may get a little bit of bleed, but that's expected with depending on what kind of brush you use. And what I want to show you though is what will happen if I actually, what I'll do is I'll turn this off so it doesn't bother us. I'll go back to a color. Just say for example, we'll grab the brown matter, and then I'll turn the water all the way up, and because this area is considered already wet, watch what happens if I blend in what's already painted. What will happen is anywhere I already put color down, it's going to bleed into those areas rather quickly. Now keep in mind, I have everything turned up fairly quick, so we don't have to wait for it to happen. You can adjust that any way you want on any given picture you want, and leave it blend how fast or how slow you want. It's going to blend really quick here, but if I take it off the paper here, then what will happen is it'll blend into that cobalt violet there and up in here, but it won't blend that much on the dry paper. And if I like everything that's going on, what's mixing now, all I have to do is hit the quick dry and it'll freeze it in place right where it's at. Moving over to here to the wet on dry, now what will happen is, being that I'm working on dry paper, if I grab another color, just let's go with the Reelin, and since I want wet on dry, I'll leave the opacity where it's at, leave the 100 all the way up and start painting. But what will happen is anywhere I overlap the paint, it's going to start bleeding together, only because it's wet on wet paint, but it's still on dry paper, so the edges that are the edge of the painted area will still pretty much stay just the way it is. And if I do the same thing with other colors, then the same thing will happen. They will blend in the areas with the paint rather quickly, but anywhere they're on the dry paper, they pretty much stay where they're at. And then again, I get all these different variations of colors. If I like what I see at the time, I'll just quick dry it, and then that'll be it. It'll stay the way it is. Now moving down to the wet on wet, I'll go to my wet layer, and I could verify that by clicking this button and show that this whole entire layer is wet. Then what I could do is start grabbing some colors, and now the same thing, since I have the water turned the whole way up, if I start putting down paint now, then everything is going to start blending. The paint strokes will blend together, and they'll also bleed out on the paper. If I start grabbing other colors, then what will happen is you could see where it's skipping over my mask and where other areas where it's not. So I will get a definite specific texture there. If I'm doing leaves at a distance or what have you, everything will happen in scale depending on how you have everything set up. Just grab maybe just a pure red and see what happens here. And then again, it'll start mixing in every direction. If I like what's going on, then I'll just freeze it in place with the quick dry, and then that's it. I will have that on that layer indefinitely. Now again, if I want this to stay just the way it is and don't want to ruin it all, then I could start working on a different layer and leave that the way it is, because I don't want to have a chance of losing that or destroying it or covering it up or what have you. Then I'll just start working on a different layer. Now, the wet on wet plus drips. If I start with any given color, just say for example the cobalt violet, again, one of my favorite colors, works well with nature. It'll start bleeding in every direction just like the wet on wet, but what I'll do is I'll quick dry that. My layer will still remain wet, but now what I could do is, this is my control for drips. If I control the drips, all I have to do is turn this on, and then depending on how long this is will be how fast and how long the drips will become. I'll turn it on fast just to show you quickly that now I'm starting from scratch because I already dried this, quick dried this cobalt violet. If I grab some blues now, or if I grab just another different value of blue, the cerulean blue, it's going to start running quickly. And what it'll do is it'll even puddle on my mask just like it would in real life. If I like what I see there, I'll quick dry it, and then that'll be it. And then what I could do is go back and add some more colors to it, and then again they'll start running right away because my layer is still wet and I still have the drips turned up rather strong. Quick dry that. Now, if that is happening too quick for me, and I do have it up fast, maybe I want, how would you say, a very strong mix, but I need time to do that, then what I could actually do is I'll go down here and we'll grab some different colors. The cobalt blue, we'll put down some violet again, and then that's going to mix again the same way quickly. If I turn that off, it will stop it. So now if I quick dry that, freeze it in set where it's at, then I could actually now grab yellow, grab some orange, and then grab maybe some blue again, And then now if I hit play, then it will start moving all the colors I just put down. Only the latest colors that I put down. Everything I quick dried before, it's going to keep it right where it was. And only my new painted area will change. If I like this drip going down there, if I like what's going on here, then if I hit quick dry again, everything will freeze right where it's at. It'll just leave my layer wet, that I could go back and then re-wet a new area or repaint a new area and start with a new section or what have you. Now, what I wanted to show you was the influence layers. If I go back up to here, and this dry on dry is the text of this layer right here. Now, if I click on this layer, that is the layer I'm working on now. If I take off the influenced, then what will happen is now this particular area, that mask is not working anymore on this layer. So if I take, just say for example, this rose and paint over it, then what's going to happen is it's all going to start running, dripping, and even taking the black and start running and dripping with it, even under the mask, because it's not an influenced layer anymore. But if I actually go down to this section and then go to the same layer, which that is where it's at, but this time make it an influenced layer, then what I could do is just paint this right across here, and now it's taking only the certain sections of the text and making them run, quick dry it, but then if I click off my mask, this area of the WET and the ampersand sign and the D are still perfectly intact. They were protected by the mask layer, and because I also had the layer I was working on influenced by the mask. Okay, this is just a basic oil painting abstract, just to start off with. Just a few notes about this. Is it was done with just a mouse, and what I'm doing now is holding in my shift key and then left clicking, and what it'll do is it'll give me a guideline that I can adjust the angle of that guideline. It'll lock in certain increments and allow me to make my brush strokes very mechanical looking if I choose to do so. By then selecting my rectangle tool, then I could create different rectangles, and I'll put them on their own layer so I could adjust them and create them the way I want, but then also move them around on an individual basis. So if I want to shuffle them around or change, more importantly, their blend modes to a multiple, overlay, luminosity, there are many choices, just like other programs, that will all determine how they look towards each other, and then even to duplicate any given rectangle and then change the blend mode to quickly make more rectangles that could be very different from each other. But otherwise, now once I'm getting close to done, the dots, if I don't like them and I don't like the drip effect compared to everything else, I could just turn that layer off and not even worry about it or go back to it. Then once I am done, I will save it as a Rebelle file, and then that way I could always go back to it and pretty much pick up right where I left off. The sphere, I'm just still blending in with just a mouse, and I'll quickly add just a gob of orange just to tie it in with the orange rectangles, and then I'll get the last rectangle in place, and that is what I will end up with. Okay, what I could go over next is how I would set up to get ready for a painting. What I have is a pencil drawing that I did freehand on paper and then scanned it in to digitize it. I'll go up and open that now, hit File, Import Image. There's my drawing, but you can still see it has a paper background. If I import it in, I'm left with sizing corners that I could enlarge it or decrease the size before I place it. If I'm okay the way it is now, I'll just double click outside of the area and it will put it in place for me. But now you could kind of see the white paper background up against the watercolor paper. Just to be sure, I'll show you what effect this will be. If I click on the red layer below it and then click on red and start to paint, you'll see what the white paper would do as far as how I could paint, or if I could paint on any layers below the drawing itself, which I couldn't. If I click off the maple branch, then you'll see what I've been painting, but you can't see it because of the white paper. Now, what I could do to eliminate that problem is click back on the maple branch, go up here to filter, hit white to alpha, and that's it. It eliminated my white paper background. Now all I'm left is with just the pencil drawing, and that's it. I would be ready to start painting. Now, for the sake of the demo, I could get rid of the red just by grabbing that layer, dragging it down to the minus sign, and it would be gone. Now, to have a picture to paint from, what I could do is open up my reference window. That's this right here. That's reference image right here. This is the window for it. Single click on it. It will open up a folder where I kept the branch photo from. Double click on it. And now I'm ready to work side by side. So if I want to enlarge this and move it around to work with this particular area, which is this right here, I can then now work side by side as I go, as tight as I want to get. But now this palette here is a palette I use all the time just for general painting. It's the colors I use most often, but it's also the identical colors that I use for my traditional watercolors on Arches paper. But if I want a custom palette of just this, all I have to do is click on this button here, go to Create Color Set from Image File, and then say if I want 25 colors, it will open up a window that I could double click on the file itself again, which is my branch. I double click on it, and now I've just created a custom color palette for this branch. And it will have some whites in the background since I photographed it up against the white. But if I would do this for myself, I would actually just work from the branch. Although I can even enlarge it and probably see better what I can than the branch itself, but I'll also give myself a chance to open up a custom color set of colors to be able to work from. It will just name it the file name. This is called just Maple Branch. So if I start working on multiple pictures and I have several different palettes here, I could choose each palette that I want depending on what picture I'm working on at that time. Now that my reference image is open, my drawing is set, ready to go, and my colors are all here that match the reference picture, I am ready to start painting. Okay, I just want to go over a few features here, just quickly about the masking layer. It was unlocked, and what I could do is if I deselect the black area and then go over and grab my transform move tool, because I'm on this layer, it will immediately grab and show a sizing bar for this particular layer. And what I could do is then if I grab a corner, it will constrain the proportions and take it up or down depending on how you want to do that. And if I grab a side, then it'll actually take it out of proportion, and then it'll actually enlarge it any way you want. If I like what I see, then I'll just double click, and then it will actually hold that in place. And keep in mind, you could do this to any layer, that if you want to make it a little bit larger, smaller, or move it around a little bit, when you start working with different types of washes, maybe an area of a wash might become over powerful, or you have too much going on in one area, you could start moving the layers around a little bit if it's just a typical background wash or what have you. But just to get out of this, what I'll do is just hit the undo button, and it'll put it back to where it was. And then what I will do is go ahead and lock that. And that is it. Now, what I will do is enlarge this a little bit, and we'll get this portion right in here. And what I wanted to show you, I will go back and select it again, and then turn that off, and then enlarge it to roughly the same area I'll be working on. And what I wanted to do is work on the outer bark layer for you, which is right here. And because of that, I want to show you a selected area within a selected area. We know that we can't paint anywhere else other than within the branch because of the selected area with the dotted lines. So now what I want to do though is because this outer bark has kind of like a light silvery gray base color, I will maybe start with this color right here and then go up and grab my mop and make it a little bit smaller. I will turn up the water completely, and I'll tell you why here in a second, but I'm going to make it a little wee bit smaller so I could paint in this area right here. And I'll show you what I mean. And I'm going to turn down the opacity just to start with. And then what I am going to do is grab my pen and start coloring. And what it'll do is I'm going to start coloring in this area. And I'll tell you why here in a second. But I just want to get a base coat over where all the outer bark is. What I'm painting around right now, that's going to be a little bit more browns. That's kind of like the inner side of the outer bark. So what I'll do is I'll just paint all this, and as long as I don't lift up the brush, I could keep on painting the same color. But because we have the water turned all the way up and it's on a dry layer, if I go to start another area to paint in, then these areas right here will blend in nicely. They can be a little bit more even distribution because you have a lot of water within the paint, so it's going to carry it out. And what it will do is it'll diffuse the two different layers together, so there's not one coat in one place and two coats in another place. And then I don't have to worry about painting around this, but then what I will do is paint around this, because that is either bare wood or inner bark. I won't have to look because it's off my reference right now. And then that's it. And then once I lift it up, then it will start blending. And if I want to even help along, I could immediately go to the blending brush and then just diffuse it slightly a little bit better. But what it'll do is it will actually blend much easier because I got water, 100% of water in the paint. But now what I'll do is grab that same color, and actually what I'm going to do is actually grab a little bit darker color, because now what I'll do is I'll leave the water all the way up, I'll turn the opacity up a little bit, but then I'll take the size of the brush up, and now what I could already start doing is start establishing my cylindrical form. But what I'm going to do first is take that layer and hit lock transparency. Now I can't paint anywhere but other than where I just painted. So what I'll do is I'll start establishing my cylindrical shape, and you can see it's pretty dark down in here and it's pretty light up in here, but I will shade that maybe just a little bit just to start getting this cylindrical shape. I'll quick dry that. And what I could do is even go back in. What I did was I actually didn't get my blender. There it is. And then what I'll do is blend that a little bit better, and then quick dry that, and then grab the same color. And then maybe what I could do is even a little wee bit darker, but I'll start going a little bit of the tans and greens, because you could see some tans in here. And what I'll do is I'll turn it down just a little bit. And then now what I could do is just start going again. And what I did was I took it off of blending and just put down paint. That I will get into later. But what I'll do now is just start putting in a different color. And what I'll do is blend these together. And I got to watch because I don't want to lose my highlighted areas. But this is digital, but we could go back in and actually lighten it up if we want to, just with the eraser. And then I'm going to do one more coat of the same color, but I'll take the opacity up a little bit more, but this time I'm going to stay back some. And then what I want to do is actually select the color, so I go back to my same brush, and then I'll put just a thin layer there, let that blend in on that side, and then stop it, and then let it blend in on this side, and then quick dry it, and then let this blend down here, and quick dry it there, and quick dry it down here, and then that's it. And then I'll go back and just diffuse that just a little bit, just to kill those straight lines so they don't become a part of the texture of the bark. And now I'm already starting to shape up a cylindrical form. But now here's the most important part. Now what I could do is I see a very strong splatter texture, which is going to work perfect, and it looks like it's like the deep greenish gray, which would be this color right here. Then I'll grab my splatter. Now since I can only paint in the area that I've already painted in, what I will do then is start splattering, and I want to cut the water. That water looks like about good right there, and the opacity I do want the whole way up because I want this texture to be fairly strong, but with a little bit of water involved, it'll bleed out just a tiny bit, just to soften the edges, so they're not floating on their own layers, so to speak. And then what I could do is just do this, and then if I like what I see, I'll freeze it, and then I'll freeze that, and you could see that there's a different kind of just like almost real fine brownish lines here, but then what I'll do is actually go back over and do that differently. So I'll just do down in here, and then that's it, and I am quick drying it as I go, and that's it. And then what I could do is this down in here, which is this right here, and it looks like that pretty much all has it, and I'm quick drying as I go, and that's it. Now for this right here, I accidentally painted over here, so we'll just go up and grab our eraser, and we'll grab a sharp edge, and we'll make it real small, but we'll keep the opacity real strong. And what I'll do is I'll just go back in and take out my mistake, and that's it. And now I have a cylindrical shape started. I have the area where I'm going to work at, and what I could do is keep that outer bark layer. Even if I go to work down on another layer of outer bark, what I could do is even make that an individual layer, but being that they're completely separated from each other, then I could even just work on this outer layer area on the same layer, because they're not going to interfere with each other anyway. And then what I could do is paint this in, unlock it, paint this in, then lock it, and then what I'll do is be able to actually work on this area the same way I just did on this area up here. But now that I have a start, I'm ready to go and to start putting in more detail as I go and work as tight as I want to, depending on what I want to do here. Okay, this will start the speed drawing. What I'll be doing is just taking the different colors and working over the specific areas of the moss and the lichen. The only thing I did do was import a few new colors from my old palettes. One of them was the turquoise cobalt, which I wanted to use on top of some of the lichen. It had just a little bit more of a bluish cast in it than any of the colors that were provided, so I wanted to have a little bit of a snap just to bring it in out a little bit more. And then I would even tone it down a little bit with the goldish yellow, more or less like a yellow ochre color. All these details I'm putting in now, they are all just a real fine line work that I could go back and tone them down and bring them up, and keep in mind if they're on their own unique layers, I could also even manipulate the layer, whether it be tone down the opacity of the layer, or even the also the blend mode, whether I make it a multiple, which will make it a little bit darker in some cases, or even pin light, hard light, and soft light. Those are the ones that I use the most, that have some really nice effects when you're overlapping layers. An overlay also works well too, but a lot of times for me, a lot of the detail is lost in an overlay blend. Now just to outline some of the more darker details of the bark, this will give more and more definition Keep in mind, none of this painting is completely done. The parts that I end up with at the very bottom of the bark and the small branch on the right, I would consider them maybe 80% complete, and then I would have to still go back in and refine things. One nice part about digital, though, is I could work really big and even as big as 100%, which is almost 4 times as large as it would print. So you could really put in some serious detail and work with it. And then when you shrink it back down, it actually even looks a little bit tighter than it really is. One thing you can't do with traditional painting now, to even just go back over some of the areas, it is bringing out just the different colors, the burnt siennas, the browns, and then blending them together. Again, I try to put each and everything on as many different layers as I can so I don't affect layers that I've already completed. These areas I'm working with now are just using the eraser and going back over them. And some of those areas may need a little bit fine-tuning. Something as simple as just real fine dark lines along some of the edges, and they'll create more of a 3D effect as to whether it is inset in the wood or if it's a worm mark or what have you. But all the different details I'm putting in are pretty much there for a reason, and I try to just make it as exact as I can. In a way, I am just copying the branch, but then to have a reliable illustration, that's what I would want to do. Here I am actually just removing some of the chunk to make it more like the original, where I can actually just go back in and erase some of the layer and then even take out the pencil mark also. But again, going back in now, I would have to make some of these areas a little bit more refined, a little bit dark. And if some of the dark areas are too flat, then I would go back in and pull out some highlights. Okay, just to go over the magic wand, this is something I will use towards the very end. But what I will do is just show you that with a picture such as this, it is a image that has the background very close to the foreground, and more importantly, the parts I want to keep. Now I'm doing this in real time, so it'll just show you that as I select, what it's doing is it's selecting the range of pixels that I have marked due to the tolerance. Now the tolerance is anywhere from 0 to 255, but no matter how I set the tolerance, it's selecting a wide range of pixels in just the pixels that are alike as to how it sees it in the range. Now in Photoshop and other programs, you can actually do a wide variety of things as per channel, create filters, create masks to do a little bit better job to actually cut out exactly what you want. But this particular program doesn't have that right now. And I am actually okay with that because I would actually prefer to cut it out. Now here I am starting at 4 times the speed. Just to give you a rough idea, the actual cutout time is only about 12 minutes total. But what I am doing is giving myself a chance to cut out exactly what I want so I could use it the way I want. And the important reason for that is to leave me a soft edge that I don't want to use a very hard-edged brush to cut it out, especially when you have such things as softer snow or things like that. Then it will have that cut out, pasted down look, and that's not what I'm looking for. What I do is try to determine the softness of the edge of that given picture and then match the softness of the edge of the size of brush I use to cut it out. And then that will usually help you blend in photographs together better, and also along with photographs in with paintings or paint on top of photographs. Now what I'm doing is just going back over and making the difference between what I want to keep and what I want to get rid of much bigger. So that way what it'll do is it'll allow me to use the magic wand to just select out the big giant sections that I could just delete all at once with a button. Once I'm done with this, then I will just save it as a PSD, and then I could use it many times over. And once I have it saved as a PSD, then I can actually use it for the multiple backgrounds, multiple tries, any number of things once I have it cut out. But now what I'll do is go back in, select the magic wand again, and then I will go in. The tolerance is set at 250. 255 again is the max, but 250 will get it done in this case. And then what I'll do is go down and select just the bottom section just to get rid of it. All I have to do is select it, hit the delete button, then unselect, and then go back in and select the big section, the major portion of the image. And then by hitting the delete key, I can get rid of it also, and then deselect. And I am left with a cutout that I am ready to work with. Okay, let's go ahead and do something with that cutout of the robin. Right now I'm just using very soft, thin brushes that will apply just a little bit of paint at a time, and working with my blend brush, I'll blend it in and get somewhat of an airbrush effect. It could even be considered completed right now, but now what I'll do is go back in, and just for the demo of it, to show you what a thick, heavy oil paint brush will also do, that will start applying what appears to be a heavy oil. Now I'm doing all of this with a mouse, so I just wanted to include this quick demo for that reason too, because a background or an abstract painting such as this, even without the robin, would be very achievable in my opinion with just the mouse. But I also will even use the painting as even a daub cloth, so to speak, just to test my brush, my colors, and then I'll just undo it. Now I'm slowing down here to just real time, just to show you what the brush strokes and the color mixing actually look like. And you could see where there's some buildup on some paints in some places, and I actually even used, as to one of my choices, a palette knife, which you get a real nice smear on one side, and then in some areas where the thin brush right here is just more or less, you can still see the canvas and the paint is fairly flat and thin. Now this, I'm just going over and showing you what actually the strokes look like up close, and how they will change and move around the paint and paint colors depending on whether you have it. I have it in blend right now, so that's actually what it's doing at a very subtle pattern, because right now I don't have the loading to the max, so it is going to grab some of the colors and mix them, but it will depend on the brush you have. This is the completed project, and that's it. Okay, let's go ahead and start with the great white egret. What I'm doing now is just layer in the real soft greens and blacks of the clear water, going back into the deep shadows of the brush. And what I wanted to do is just point out a couple of things about this painting I'm trying to create now, is that I photographed a bird on a somewhat overcast day, whereas the reference I'm using of the great blue heron, it was photographed on a bright sunny day. And I picked those two combinations for a reason, just to show you as a demo, and that is that I will use filters to downplay the bird and actually make it darker, so I could then make it look as if it was in a direct shadow, and then artificially create sunlight on what areas I think the sun would be hitting if it was standing where it was. And then what I have to do now is establish everything that's in the layers of the painting, and as long as you keep it in separate layers in your painting, then the layers of the painting will be much easier to work with. And what I mean by that is everything that's going to be on the bottom of the water will be at the very bottom, so that would be your very bottom layer. And then your ripples, your reflection, things of that nature will be up higher. The refracted light will be on the base, but it will be above the sand, so it's in a given layer itself too. And then your branches and everything all of it, keep in mind, is all behind the bird. So that way I could just go ahead and paint right over the bird, but it's still a layer that is behind the bird. So that way when I go to paint, I don't have to worry anything like that. But what it does is it also establishes the layers of your painting in real life and layers of the natural world as to how things are going to be overlapping. What I'm trying to do now is just create the illusion of certain branches being in direct sunlight. Granted, I only spent about an hour and 15 minutes or so on this painting that I have all together, so it would be considered far from finished, but I was more interested in showing you a couple of different things as to how things could be done just to completely establish something in an artistic manner. And that is also mixing a photograph cutout with a painting. That what I'm doing now is putting in the legs, and since they're underwater, then they will be broken up by the wave movement along with the reflection, and then also now the shadow that I'm putting in. But what I'll actually do here, I'm adjusting the contrast and making it darker, and then I have the layers selected so I don't have to worry about painting the white outside the bird, and then that way I could create several different layers of highlights, which is kind of important because I may change the blend modes on each layer, because what I want is some of the texture of the original bird to come through the artificial highlight area, so it doesn't just look like a layer of white on top of something else. That way the blend mode will change some of the textures, subtle shadows and shapes of the bird to allow them to come through the first white color painting of the highlights. But then now, once I get everything scribbled in, then I could soften things down and adjust them. And to finish this painting, I would definitely go back in and add some colors other than just pure white, and then that way it will give it more of a texture, more of a realistic look, and not have the white jump out at you as its own individual layer and not be a part of the bird instead of its own layer. Now just putting in just some of the reflections of the brush in the background and the foregrounds along with the reflection of the birds, just to give you a rough idea, and different values just to layer them in just to get started. We'll just give you a rough idea how I did things in sequence. And as long as you keep everything in its own layer, you really can't make a mistake. And that's it. Okay, here's just another example of a watercolor painting with a photograph. This is the original photo here, and that is the borders of it. If I go down and turn it off, then we'll be left with the cutout, and then this is the area I painted. I can move in on it, and this is 100% already, so this is pretty tight, pretty close. And then we could try and find out where we actually painted. This up in here is not finished. I will leave this kind of loose. Down in here is where it's finished, and then I even made this little bit of vine hanging down to match the rest of the vine, but then also to help disguise where the seam is. This hopefully will grab your attention instead of where the two overlap. With that in mind, this is the palette that the 25 color reproduced. And then if I turn off the cutout, then this is the actual painted area. It's feathered into the photograph, and I could actually blend the colors and the photograph itself in with the painting, and that helps disguise it a great deal. The following will be a speed painting of a little bit of what I did just to get this done this far. Okay, this is just working with the burnt siennas and the browns, and even a slight purplish brown that was generated by the color palette maker. Again, I'll also go back in and blend in the colors into the photograph to try and eliminate that hard edge that was left by cutting out the picture. That is actually the border of the picture. And then I'll also use the color picker to pull out more exact colors that would help me blend them even easier. Okay, just another example of just a very basic finished piece. This is St. Philip's Church in old historic Charleston down in South Carolina. This is the palette it generated with a 25 color palette of this original photograph. And if I go over here and turn this layer off, it'll just show just the areas the way I have it set up just to show you. It'll show just the sections of photograph that I used for the finished piece. And then I just wanted to see if I could feather in the painting with the photograph again, just to keep it loose looking, but more or less like a traditional watercolor, but just to see how well I could get it to work with. Now, if I turn this one off, that is the finished piece, and the bits of photograph are still in there. Okay, this is an example of a photograph with some detail work on it. I've already showed you some just freehand and then some photography mixed with freehand. And then now this is a photograph with a little bit of freehand on it. Now, it might have tipped you off, but we'll see if you can figure it out before I show you. This is a photograph of a mushroom I took down in Cherry Run, Burl Township, Pennsylvania. And what it is it was right at the edge of a heavy hemlock forest that you could see the light gray sky reflecting off of all the soaking wet leaves. It was a wet snow that day, somewhat wet snow in late fall. And what it was just something that caught my eye, so I thought I'd experiment a little bit. And what I did was, just to show you, I managed to catch this water droplet just about to fall. Well, no, that's not true. What I did was I actually put this water droplet in freehand, and I used the left one to paint from as a reference. Okay, that's not true either. What I did was put them both in, but before I show you where and how, I actually picked these two locations, very specific reason, so my white reflections and highlights off the water droplets themselves really show up. If I would have put them over in here or over in here, especially right in here, they would have been completely lost up against a lighter background, and you may not have even noticed them, especially from a distance. But this is the large droplet, and this is the small droplet, and this is what actually was the original mushroom when I photographed it. But just to use my artistic license, I put them both droplets in just to add a little bit of what I considered a somewhat action shot, so to speak, to a typical mushroom. Because basically, catching a water droplet just about to fall photographically would be very difficult. But this is just a way of combining mixed media to get the end result you want, or even just to enhance what you already have. Okay, wake up, and thanks for watching the entire demo. Thank you.